Welcome back to Detailed, an original podcast by RCAT. This is a show where we uncover lessons learned to help you navigate your next project. I'm Charisse Lakeside, Senior Spec Writer at RDH Building Science, and your host. My guest today is Marcos Santa Anna, licensed architect, general contractor, and high-performance building designer. Marcos is the founder of Alloi, A-L-L-O-I, a Los Angeles-based architect-led design-build firm. Since launching Alloi in 2009, Marcos has been pioneering sustainable and energy-efficient design, inspired by his diverse studies and rich family heritage in the arts and building. Alloi specializes in contemporary design influenced by Southern California's mid-century modernists, including Neutra, Schindler, and Lautner. Guided by Zen minimalism and Feng Shui, Alloi's design ethos aims for architectural harmony and serene spaces, drawing inspiration from Japanese architects such as Sakamoto, Apollo, and Ando. The project we are chatting about today is the striking Zen Modern home in Los Angeles, California. The Zen Modern Residence, a 2,650 square foot home, seamlessly merges poetry and pragmatics. Originally a traditional 1,650 square foot house, it underwent a thoughtful transformation, resulting in a stunning two-story home. True to its name, the Zen Modern Residence incorporates Feng Shui principles to promote harmony and tranquility. Now, let's get into the details. Welcome back to Detailed. My guest today is Marcos Santa Anna, licensed architect. Now, listen carefully here because this is unique. Licensed architect, general contractor, and high-performance building designer. Marcos is the founder of Alloi, a Los Angeles-based architect-led design-build firm, and I am excited about this conversation. The project that we're going to talk about today is the striking Zen Modern home in Los Angeles, California. Marcos, welcome to Detailed. I am now especially excited to have you here, a fellow both Dallas Cowboys and Yankees fan. Thank you for joining me today. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Is it nice weather there in LA? Are you in LA?
I'm in LA. It's tough to complain when you're here in LA.
Yeah.
The weather has been changing over the past couple of years, but really tough to complain. 60-degree weather pretty much every day.
So we always start off the podcast with a fun icebreaker question just to get to know you a little bit and to warm us up. The one for you today is, I'd like to know what you think is one important skill that you think everybody should have.
Yeah, I think that the most important skill, especially for an architect, would be the ability to play. So, because oftentimes when you're working on a project and you're kind of thinking, all right, now's the time to be creative, you switch. And so you kind of have an open and enclosed kind of methodology where most people have. And when you're in the open state, that's what I consider more of like a creative state. So I would just recommend trying to leverage that play state. And so that way you can open your mind to be more creative. And so, yeah, there's a lot of deep philosophical thought into that world, but it's really just relaxing, especially if you're kind of up against a wall where you're trying to solve a problem and you're forcing yourself into solving it. If you just relax and think about it as more of a play or like a game, that's actually pretty helpful.
I love that answer. We clearly have a few things in common. So I believe that life is a lot more fun, no matter what you're doing, work, whatever, if you tap your inner child. And so I always make all my friends name their inner child, and you have to remember to let your inner child, mine is Peaches, let Peaches come to the forefront and open up that side of your brain, that not everything has to be tedious. And and difficult. And if you look at it with a different perspective, maybe the perspective of a 5-year-old on occasion, it's a game changer.
Exactly.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
love
it's so
that.
true.
Before we even talk about this home, I would like to talk a little bit about being a quote architect led design build firm. While design build is becoming more and more common every day, and I'm hearing about it more often, it's still not something you see all the time. Tell me a little bit about how your practice works and how much of a role you take in construction.
Yeah. So I'm actually a licensed architect and a licensed builder. So we have architects and general contractors in our firm. So our process, a lot of our clients come to us with the idea that they want us to be their architect and also their builder. But also some clients come to us with a beautiful house already designed, and they say, hey, can you guys build this project? Or some architects will actually come to us as well. So we're actually a full service design build company, but we also act as pure architectural studio and also pure build studio. So there's different kind of methodologies, but the most common methodology for us is the design build, where it's integrated. So we had kind of like a 5-step process where we first meet the client, we call it the connect stage, and then we go into what we call the concept study, which essentially is the schematic design, kind of heavy schematic design idea. And because we're design build, we're integrated, we're always thinking about the construction stage. So we actually have in-house estimation. So estimation is very critical as a design build company. So every design we present to our clients, we also have a budget, or in the beginning, it's a ballpark budget, where it's very loose. And so every design has an attached budget. That's also very critical for clients who have budgets in mind, which most do, right? So yeah, I think that's the most critical portion. Then also, most of our clients love the fact that we have one line of communication. So if you get comfortable with the architect in the design stage, as you transition into the build, you're not having to put your trust in another firm. So that's also a very critical aspect. I would say one last aspect, which is important for design build, is being really connected to the trades. So I actually grew up in New York, and my father was a site supervisor for IBM, built large commercial projects. My uncle was a general contractor. So growing up in the trades, really something that's part of my DNA, you could say. But really being connected to the trades, I feel like the trades really can teach architects a lot. And so I think that's kind of a basis of design build.
I can't believe it's like the first project question, and I'm already going to go down a rabbit hole. One of the things I do a lot of speaking and a lot of teaching. And one of my more notable speaking engagements was when I, probably about 5 years ago or so, I spoke at the World of Concrete. And my audience was around 40 concrete subcontractors. And I got to admit, when I walked up in front of that room, they looked at me like, what in the heck do you think you're going to teach me, little girl? And I did teach them a lot, and they taught me a lot. And it was a great experience. But one of the things that really was driven home for me in that particular presentation, as I was chatting with them afterwards, was how much frustration I heard from the trades in how their general contractors either dealt with them or how they didn't feel valued. It was just always kind of to ratchet down their price or a lot of frustration about that relationship, which I would imagine in the design build environment is a different story.
Exactly. Yeah. And I mean, the stronger relationships you have with your trade partners, the better. And especially if there's something new in the project that you're working on or you're designing, the benefit is that we can just pick up the phone and we have direct access to like your example, the concrete trade, so, and the thing is, the more you work, more construction. I mean, this is pretty much most of the architects who are listening know that the more you know about construction, the better your design can be. How can you integrate concrete with steel, with wood, all that kind of thing. So really having that connection is pretty clutch and critical.
Well, in a traditional design bid build environment, contractually, the sub's not allowed to talk to the architect.
Yeah,
They
exactly.
have to
That's true.
go through the contractor.
That's right.
Um,
One
Interesting.
separation. That's true.
I bet projects are really interesting in your office. So, wow, this home makes quite the statement. Let's start our chat with a little background on this project. And I'm very purposefully asking this question because I know what you started with. Um, and tell me a little bit about what you had there and what you had to work with when you started.
Yeah. So first off, the clients were one of the nicest people that I've met so far. It's a husband and wife, and they had two young sons at the time. So they had been living in the home for many years. It was a one-story 1950s house, kind of typical for LA neighborhoods. And so they were looking to transform the house. The homeowner, actually, especially the wife, she was really interested in Japanese architecture. She was interested in Feng Shui. She loved modern architecture. So that was a critical aspect of the design. Husband was a firefighter. So he was more about getting things done, not necessarily about design. So there's always that interesting conflict. So, but yeah, they were really looking for expanding the home, creating a primary suite that would have a typical walk-in closet and primary a bathroom. And then the kids also, they wanted to have their own space. So that was kind of the basis of the project. And then also where it's situated in LA, it's just southwest of the two major arteries or the freeways. One's the 90 and one's the 405. And it's sort of semi-close to the ocean. So they wanted to see if they could capture views by going up to the second floor, potentially of the North Mountains and also the West, the ocean. That was kind of the basics. Then like getting a little more into the project, the other issue was that which many homes are in LA, the garage is in the front of the house and the garage door is, instead of facing the street, it's perpendicular to the street. So what that creates is a curving driveway. And so oftentimes you're driving, you're trying to get into your garage. It's not the easiest way to drive in. So that was one of the other things that we first analyzed is if we rotate the garage, where are we going to place the garage? Are we going to shift it to the west side or just rotate it? So there's some of the issues. And then of course, again, most of the homes were, built in that era, weren't really high performing. So no insulation, drafty windows, that kind of thing. So we wanted to address also performance. So it's kind of a basis of the starting of the project.
When you look at the two side by side, the finished home now or the finished home, how it's going to be, and that 1950s home, it's night and day. I mean,
oh yeah, exactly, that's true.
It looks like you just moved to another planet. And when I saw that was what you had to start with, I was like, oh boy, I got to hear how this went from this to this. Because it's drastic.
Yeah, we're also curious about how the neighbors were going to take it too, because that area is, it definitely makes a statement in that local microclimate. So
we know who has the cool house.
Yeah.
So this home is such a huge departure from the simple one-story home that you started with. Tell me a little bit, once you got there, once you looked at it, about your design vision and goals.
So specifically because our clients were interested in Feng Shui, we wanted to create something that when you pulled up after, let's say, a day at work, that you would instantly feel relaxed. And so we wanted to make sure that the overall design aesthetic of the composition was simple in some ways. And so we had pretty much 3 basic volumes. We had the garage, which I mentioned. Then we had the second floor, which was the bedroom, the kids' bedroom, and the primary suite. And then we need access to get to that space. So that was the stair tower. So we're really working on those 3 volumes. And we also try to figure out how are we going to integrate this new construction into the existing house. So we look to try to figure out, because we're also design build and we also deal with budgets, is what's the most functional way to integrate all this new construction into the older home. And it just so happened that the ridge or the roof, the highest point of the roof, there was a ridge that went east-west, I would say about 25% into the property. So we use that as a guideline, as if you're slicing in surgery. So we slice across that line. And then from that point back, we kept a lot of the structure. And from that point forward is where we did all of the new construction. So that was kind of the basics for the composition of the whole project.
So I looked at the demolition photo on your webpage, and I am not an architect, and I was having a hard time trying to figure out how much of the original home were you able to keep and use.
I would say about 50 to 60% of the, and even the aspects of the house that we kept, because typically when you're adding a second floor on top of a first floor, you're, especially in the 40s, 50s homes, oftentimes the concrete foundation is pretty solid, but it's typically not deep enough. And so you're either having to underpin the concrete foundations or tear it out and build new. So where we built the new addition, we had to kind of work in and around some of the existing footings. So that was also a little bit challenging.
So when I looked at these pictures and what you did here, that's kind of what led me to this next question, that and the fact that you're in California. Were there any challenges or special requirements related to permitting or approvals needed by the authorities having jurisdiction with such a drastically different, such a drastic move this house was from what it started with, and using part of the old and adding the new? How did that process go?
Yeah, so surprisingly, the design itself wasn't an obstacle as far as from the city building department or planning department. But what was an obstacle was we had to get 3 modifications, or request 3 modifications through the planning department. It's actually on each side yard. So the west side yard, the east side yard, and the front yard as well. So luckily they approved all those modifications, so we were able to build as you can see in the final photos. But the critical item, if we couldn't get that modification, was if you see on the left side of the photo, we have that tall stair tower, which is in the gray plaster. That long tall wall would have to had a step. So this idea of kind of like a wedding cake, where if you go up higher, it steps in. So luckily, with the modification, it allowed us to go straight up. So that was a good thing there. So yeah, those are the only really modifications or issues we have with the city.
That's not bad. It's not usually the story I get out of California.
Yeah. Luckily, we weren't in like a specific plan where they have more restrictions than just the typical restrictions or limitations.
So let's get into some more specific details. I like to just work my way from the outside in. To me, there's 3 major parts of a project: the site, the exterior, and the interior. So let's start with the site. How did you, because that was another thing I really struggled with the pictures. It looks like the site was pretty drastically different, the things you did on the outside of this home, from what you started with to what it ended up being. What'd you do there?
So with site-wise, if you start from the back of the property, we capture the rainwater, and we use that rainwater to irrigate the landscape. So we actually created like a Zen rock garden in the back. So the rainwater feeds that rock garden and also some of the succulents in the rain garden. As you go towards the front, most of the work that I was mentioning before is the new construction in the front of the house. But in order to achieve this rotated garage, we had to build a new curb cut. So we had street work. So the entire sidewalk is new. The driveway apron, where you drive into the driveway, is brand new. And so we shifted the driveway from the west side, as you can see it in the photo, it's now on the east side. And so what that did is allowed us to, as the homeowners, the guests park, they're able to traverse across the landscape to get to the entry door. So that's one of the features that we like to integrate into our projects. is a Feng Shui approach where you actually meander through the project, whether it's the site or the house. And so, as you can see, we created large planters in the front yard, Core-10 steel planters. We had a berm in the front. And so you kind of walk through these planters and around to the west side before you enter into the entry porch, or what's known as a kind of ngawa in Japanese. So the site starts kind of the experience of the project. And so we always think about the site as the most important aspect of before you even enter a building or a house.
Well, I like that because not everybody looks at it that way. And they make this amazing building, but then they don't put the same care and feeding into your approach. And your approach to a building is a big thing. I mean, that's your first impression, and that moving through it and how it makes you feel, or your experience with it. But it's not always something people put as much effort into it as I'd like to see.
Yeah, I agree. I studied landscape architecture in Denmark, so we always try to integrate the interiors and the exteriors.
Anything you haven't studied?
Skydiving, maybe. Yeah.
Oh, I've done that.
Skydived, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Do it. You will never ever.
I'm afraid of heights, so I don't know if that's a good thing.
Oh, yeah. If you're going to panic, you might not be a safe person to jump out of an airplane.
Yeah, exactly.
So the exterior of this home is pretty unique. Tell me about the design of the exterior and some of the material choices that you use for the exterior of the home to achieve this Zen look and feel.
Okay. Yeah. So we actually looked at two different materials, plaster and tile. We also looked at wood. So we wanted to have, we knew we had these 3 volumes that we could play with. And so we ended up switching from wood. The stair tower was going to be wood at first, but with respect to maintenance, it had a lot of southern exposure and western exposure. So we wanted to make sure it was very durable for our client. So we looked at tile, and then we ended up with a custom steel trowel plaster. It's more about textures instead of materiality for the actual house. So the garage volume is 30/30 smooth trowel plaster, which we selected white, and then the sleeping volumes are black, 30/30 smooth finish. And the stair tower is the custom raked stucco, which also is kind of an interesting story because on site we were trying to figure out what's the best spacing for the raking, and we also wanted to make sure. It's one of the good things about being really tied to your trade partners. Whereas we've custom fabricated stainless steel trowels, and so we went to at least 3 or 4 of them to try to figure out what's the thickness of the rake and what's the spacing, and then we tested them on site to see because we wanted to have that shadow line. So when the sun goes across the sky, hits these horizontal rakes, we wanted to see that shadow line to be pretty pronounced, but at the same time we didn't want it to be too brittle. So with the two kids, 2 young sons playing outside with like a basketball, for example, it hit the stucco. We want to make sure it didn't fracture. So, but yeah, that was another interesting aspect. With respect to the landscape, we've got a steel screen that is that front entryway screen, which creates this porch or ngawa effect. Board form concrete, Core-10 steel planters, and then sand finish concrete driveway. Some of the different materials.
Well, I can tell you, I love it. I'm a huge fan of simple but elegant. I don't like busy. I don't like busy. I mean, it has its place. Like when I went to St. Peter's in Vatican City, you walk in and there's something every inch that you look at, and it's incredible and moving, and that's a great place for it. But for me, like in my own home, things are pretty simple, pretty straight lines, pretty, and I operate and calm down more in that kind of environment. So I love it. And you achieved it, what you're trying to achieve on the outside of this home.
Yeah. I mean, even like the flashy So if you wanted to achieve that simplicity, it goes back into the details. So, you want to have obviously waterproof roof and different surfaces. So we actually designed what we call in our firm in the industry as a knife edge detail. Mm-hmm. So we always have custom sheet metal. So the knife edge detail, when you look up and see these volumes, you actually just see a razor thin edge instead of seeing a wrap over, which is more of a traditional waterproofing detail. So yeah, but you really got to think about all the details.
I'm just going to guess here that because you are also building it in many cases, that you probably put quite a bit of care and feeding into doing that homework up front on those details.
Yeah,
because you know exactly what it's going to take to build it, which isn't always the case for a design professional. They're not builders, they're design professionals.
True. Yeah, and you're always kind of back and forth between design and buildability and like on the risk involved with building it yourself. Obviously, as the contractor, you're taking responsibility for all the waterproofing. So, but the good thing is you can really kind of not necessarily experiment, but you kind of know what works and like how far you can go to push design, but still make sure it's watertight and those kind of things.
Does your two halves, your builders and your designers, I know some of those cross, do they ever fight about it? Or argue or disagreements?
Yeah. Oh yeah, exactly. Yeah. Because it's always, there's certain things, certain details and that we like to do. But most of our projects, there's something new, at least a couple different things that we haven't done before. And so on our build side, it's always, okay, what's the new one on this project? Let's figure it out.
What paces are you putting us through this time?
Yeah, exactly. That's true.
So I understand there's a hidden roof deck, which I don't believe I saw in my pictures, but I'm interested in that. So what needs to be considered? Obviously, I work for a building science firm, and so I don't think all these years I've worked in architecture that I understood how important it is making a tight building until I started working with a bunch of building enclosure consultants. A whole different viewpoint about those kinds of things. And I know how important it is. And there's a lot of challenges when you're designing a roof, typically, that people are going to use. So tell me about that hidden roof deck and what you had to think about to appropriately design a roof deck on a residential home, and what you did in your design to accommodate those needs.
Yeah, so the roof deck, it was something that the client had asked for, and we tried to figure out the size, the scale, the location, besides like the practicality things and making sure it's watertight, that kind of thing. But if you look at the overall front facade, let's say, the stair tower, which is the raked plaster, it wraps over top of the black volume, and so that piece wraps over and becomes the guardrail for the upper deck or roof deck. So again, trying to make the space feel as if it's very fundamental, as if you're 3 years old and you're playing with blocks, on your floor in your bedroom. And so code requires a guardrail, to be 3'6" high. So what we did is we used that as the datum, and we carry that across, and that becomes the max height of the stair tower. So functionality, it works, but it also jives with the overall volumes. And then another interesting aspect, we looked at adding a stair tower bulkhead with actual stairs. But that wasn't actually part of the budget. We looked at, because we do a lot of feasibility studies back and forth. What does it look like if we have a full roof deck on the roof? What are the costs involved? And so that was cut from the project. But what we do have is a custom aluminum black powder coated ladder that we installed inside the house. And so it stands vertically, but you can actually pull it out to be a little bit more splayed, and there's actually wheels. So this was actually essentially almost like a product that we designed and it was pretty interesting how it tucks away. So the roof deck, really, with most of the time, the roof deck is used for watching fireworks, around the 4th of July. But in general, roof decks, we want to make sure they're durable. And so there's different options. You can go with a TPO, commercial grade roofing system with pedestals, and it could be wood, it can be tile, it can be that kind of thing. So that's what we do if we're going to have a lot of usage out of the roof deck. This particular project, we just went with a typical roof membrane because we knew it wasn't going to be used that often. But they do like to go up there to watch the fireworks.
Oh, I would hang out up there, especially in those hot days in the evening, go up there when things are cooling off. Before we get into specifics about the design and spaces on the interior, tell me what you mean when you say that you're using Feng Shui methodologies and how you used them in this home.
Okay. Yeah, Feng Shui, there's kind of a spectrum of Feng Shui. You can go more into the spiritual side, and there's also a more functional side of Feng Shui. So the basis of Feng Shui is that there's energy flow. And so we, as I mentioned a little bit before, we think of the project as not just where the house starts, but where the building starts, where the site starts. So we think about the process of experiencing the pathway from site to house. And once you get to the house, how the user, or in this case, the homeowner, traverses through his or her house. And so the qi, which is the energy flow, you want to make sure that the qi enters the house, but also doesn't rush through the house and exits. You also want to make sure that the staircase isn't directly in front of the front entry door. So the energy flows up into the bedroom suites. You want to have a little more privacy. So that's some of the things we analyze. Then there's more functional, which is having correct daylighting, ventilation. So one of the aspects that we integrated with for the ventilation is the stair tower. So as you wrap up the stair tower and you go up to the second floor, we have a skylight that's located directly in the center of this U-shaped stair. And it's an electronically controlled skylight. It opens, and we tilted it to open west. So that way we get the western breezes that flow into the house to provide a little bit more ventilation and sustainability to the site. So yeah, those are some of the basics of Feng Shui. There's also, I like to have the front entryway to homes offset or perpendicular to the street, which provides a little more privacy. So for example, when the doors open, if someone's passing by along the street, they can't see directly into the house. So it's just a very basic privacy technique. This particular house and where the garage was located, we couldn't tilt the entryway or the entry door. So that's where that entry screen comes into play. So that kind of serves as that boundary. So some of the ideas.
I love you can't see into the house. Right. I'm in a 3-story townhome, and you can't see into my house from ground level. Lower story, a middle, and an upper. And I love that. I always hated that people could, see in your windows. But I have light and windows everywhere. They're just placed in places so that I get that privacy, but I still get that flood of light.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So
that's pretty smart.
Big fan of that methodology. Walk me through the design of the interior of this home. What were some of the spaces, and how did you, especially a 1950s home, how did you transform the framing within this home to fit the spaces you now needed on the inside of the home?
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, the framing, most of the framing from the existing home in that front section, we removed. The foundations, we kind of kept in many of the locations. But as you enter that front door, you're entering into a foyer. Off to the left is a staircase, which takes you up to the bedroom suites. As you go up to the second floor, you've got a primary suite off to your right. which has a walk-in closet and a bathroom. And that bathroom faces north. The interesting thing about that bathroom is we've got a pretty good size open shower, and there's a corner glass window which faces north and east. So as you're showering, you have great views, which is kind of fun. The kids' bedroom is off to the north of the primary bedroom, and has an interior window which faces the street. So we also brought light into the kids' bedroom from the north, but also from the south. So from the kids' bedroom, you can see into the stair tower, and then also through this tall, I think it's about 22 foot long curtain wall window, which faces the street. So we try to bring in light anywhere as we could. And then downstairs, we added a guest suite. So we have a bathroom, another bedroom downstairs, laundry, and then direct access from the garage.
So 2 bathrooms?
Yeah, so there are 2 bathrooms. We remodeled 1 bathroom downstairs, and we added a primary bathroom upstairs.
Okay.
So, and then as you go through in the back portion of the house, we went through and kind of updated the doors and windows, some of the detailing, the baseboards, those kind of things. We modernized that portion. And we even entered into the kitchen as well a little bit. We opened up some walls in the kitchen, installed new countertops and that kind of thing. So,
describe for me a few unique design features inside the home. If I were to walk through, I'd go, oh, that's kind of cool.
That makes sense. Yeah. If you go up to the second floor, we have a lot of light pockets. So we're inspired by a lot of the mid-century modern architects that were commissioned to do a lot of homes in Southern California. So even back then, those architects understood simplicity. So keeping, for example, ceilings clean, and keeping volumes very clean. So we try to do in this house is hide all of the light fixtures, but still allow the light to flood the space. So like in the primary bedroom, you'll see light pockets, and also we tucked in light pockets. So in one section, it's a light pocket, and it also wraps and becomes a drapery pocket. So the drapery, the lighting is concealed. And then the primary bathroom, we've got something similar going on there. We also have a stone tile floor in the shower itself. So you kind of have that textural element when you're taking a shower. There's some of the little features in the house that made sense.
They're game changers, though.
Yeah.
Tell me about some of the material choices and finishes that you have in this home.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. Well, for example, we've got porcelain tile in the primary bathroom upstairs. We have the pebble texture. We have walnut cabinetry, custom cabinetry for the vanity. We have a integrated mirror that kind of sits into the tile. Those are some of the features in the primary suite. One of the, I think, interesting portions of this project, because the clients were very focused on how can we make our house more Japanese, or how can we make it more Feng Shui inspired. The existing house had red oak floors. So, most people are looking at, I want to have white oak. I want this very light experience. But because they were so inspired by the Japanese feel, what we did is we took the red oak, we bleached it, and we applied a wire brushing and went over with a dark stain. So the floors are actually almost a zebra effect, which is kind of interesting. So you don't usually see that often. So you have the striations from the wire brushing, and those striations are the white portions, and then the top coat is black. So it creates a very contrasty interior.
How did you even know to do that?
Actually, again, so a lot of these things are just hanging out on site, honestly. So hanging out on site, getting really close with your trade partners, having lots of discussions with the client and with our partners. So, in some ways it would be kind of experimentation, but we look at different options. Obviously, there's a lot of off the shelf, pre-stained flooring that you can kind of look through, but we're really trying to figure out it was also how can we work with the existing flooring. So the idea would be, one option is to tear out all the flooring, right? Just start fresh and go with a pre-finished flooring. But we saw an opportunity there where we could keep the existing red oak and kind of make it interesting.
Well, if you got some really good solid wood floors there, if you can keep those, I
Yeah,
mean, I have, some of the fake wood looking luxury vinyl tile downstairs, and it looks great, but that's not the same as the same feel or warmth of good wood floors. And so if
that's
you
true.
have a solution to turn it into something that it wasn't before, I would never get rid of the wood.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I mean, every project's different. So, and especially if you're working on remodels, there's always something that, you really think, what can we do with this material, without just throwing it in the trash, for example.
Right. What would you say was the biggest challenge in the design of this home, and how did you navigate that?
So I think the probably largest challenge would be the overall structural gymnastics, I would say. And so we do have a pretty good sized cantilever. That black box overhangs the white garage element. I think it's about 8 feet in one dimension and about 12 feet in another direction. And so in order to achieve that, we have a double beam system. So beam on top of beam, perpendicularly located, which seems sort of logical. But if you wanted to make it really look like, again, you're playing with blocks as a kid, you have to think in advance. And obviously being an architect, you're able to dial this in on the drawing side. But I think the critical element there was to not have the black box integrate into the white box, which would be a simpler way to do it, where you can actually have the beam cut through the white element. But to make sure that you achieve the idea of resting blocks, I think that was somewhat challenging. And so the way we achieve that is we have a spacer block. So as the one beam gets placed on the other, we have a spacer to allow for the finishes. So oftentimes, as long as you plan ahead and allow for the soffit finish to wrap into the top of the parapet finish, making sure there's a little bit of space there so you can end up with a reveal, that's pretty critical. So it's one of the examples of this project.
I'm just amazed at the care and feeding you put into to a lot of these things.
That's the thing. I mean, the residential world, comparing resident, because we do also commercial work, but the residential world, you could build a massive commercial building. Oftentimes these smaller homes take more care. The little tiny details here and there, which are pretty amazing. And that's another thing that's kind of interesting, is because we work on commercial work, we can integrate the more commercial systems into the residential and kind of vice versa. So like this house, from the front facade, you can see we have a very tall window. I think it's about 22 feet or so. But we ended up choosing a commercial storefront system instead of going residential because of our experience on the commercial side, and then also cost analysis. So those two large glass windows are actually commercial systems.
You don't hear that very often. I don't know if I've ever heard that before. I don't work in a lot of residential as far as, the day
commercial
job.
Yeah.
It's all commercial pretty much. But I guess I never thought about doing that on a home, using a storefront system.
Yeah, sometimes it makes sense for the right project, but you just got to always keep your mind open.
Absolutely. Well, I love that you can take them and meld them and use them, that you keep your mind open enough to explore what commercial things might be a better fit for a home, or what maybe things you do in residential might enhance a commercial project.
Exactly.
I think we can all learn from that. Were there any unique sustainability features that were a part of this design?
Yeah, I would say sustainability, probably like I mentioned previously, with respect to capturing wind. That's one of the features. Also daylighting. So we have a lot of light in the primary bedroom, which enters from the southwest. The kids' bedroom upstairs and the bathroom have north clear story windows. with raising lighting. Actually, I remember there's one other feature, is in the primary bedroom, we have a double stud wall on the south face. So where we get the most heat, we want to make sure we added a little bit of extra insulation in that wall. So that was another kind of advantage. And then I guess one last would be the rain capture. So on the east and west side yards, we've got a series of rain barrels, which capture the rain.
Well, in California, I mean, I know it comes and goes, the problems that you have there with drought and not enough water, but it seems like at some point every summer, California's having some struggles with getting enough water, especially when you get further south.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
that's important if you want to have anything green in your yard.
Mm-hmm.
Because I'm assuming that's what most of that rainwater capture is used for, is irrigation.
Correct. Yep. Yeah, it's just irrigation. That's right.
Yeah, but it doesn't come out of the system if you have that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. One of the interesting parts of the project that I kind of like was the front entry planter. It's this massive planter wrapped in Corten steel. And kind of because we spend a lot of time on site, we always have, when you do your excavation, you're ready for your concrete, the spoils, let's call it, of the additional excavation, usually you haul it away. And for this project, we figured, actually, why don't we get creative with this extra soil? So we use the extra soil from the excavation to create a berm. So the front entryway has a large berm, which adds a little bit of privacy, but it's also kind of a unique feature. And I remember we had some fun trying to figure out what the shape is going to be. So we sculpted as best as we could what type of form we were going to create this berm. And then we wrapped the berm in diamondia, which is kind of a low plant that actually creates almost like a carpet. So really accentuating the form of the earth. Just we have some fun sometimes.
Really? I couldn't tell.
Yeah,
Let's talk about construction a little bit. Again, this is a major transformation. Have you encountered, or did you encounter any challenges during construction that you weren't? I mean, I don't think I've ever worked on a project that there wasn't something that happened during construction that caused you to pivot or rethink something or redetail something. How did construction go, and what unique challenges did you have to solve in that phase?
Yeah, I think this particular project is really making sure that we were dialed in with the framing, as I mentioned before, with the overlapping volumes. So really being on site at the critical times. We had a site supervisor on site pretty much 24/7, but it's really thinking about planning ahead, right? Like every good architect or builder is doing at all times. So the idea is, and something I kind of like to do is think about what are you not thinking about? So everyone knows what they're thinking about. What are you not thinking about, right? And so that's also a key feature, but really dialing in that the finishes. So even when you're pouring concrete, you're thinking concrete, okay, where's it going to go? You really have to be thinking about those details on the roof, details where the garage hits the second floor and all these different pieces. So that's where I think it's critical. And actually most of the team on our build side, they're trained as architects. So they understand the idea of materiality and intersections and vertex and edges and all these things, right? They're learning from architecture school. So it's helpful to have a solid team who knows architecture on the build. But challenges, I would say that's probably the most critical challenge for the project, which with respect to the framing. I would say maybe the other challenge was with respect to the HVAC. So there's kind of a lot going on in a little space. I think we added about 800 square feet or so to the second floor, plus the garage, the stair tower. So there is a lot of things happening and volumes intersecting. And to make sure you have enough space for ducting, we also, as you could say, one of the sustainability features is that we had a fresh air intake. So, if you're familiar with the commercial construction, you always need to have a certain percentage of fresh air in commercial buildings. Oftentimes residential, it's not thought about, or no one really wants to add that to the project. So we actually have a toggle switch in the laundry. So because as you probably heard, California has fires here and there. Now it's becoming a consistent annual event. But if and when there'll be more fires, the clients can go down to the laundry room, flip a switch, close off the fresh air intake, if there's smoke in the air. But otherwise, keep it open. You get the fresh air blending with the return air.
I'm in Oregon, so we have the same fire problems. And my backyard is literally a forest, a huge forest. Not like a little park forest. I am backed up to the forest. So it's an issue. Nice. Yeah. And a few years ago, we had our wildfires were so bad, you couldn't leave your house. And I didn't live here at the time. I lived somewhere else. And it was an old 50s duplex, and trying to keep that out it was impossible. It was horrible. And so, that's a lot of foresight to think about, putting in a switch to be able to close that off. I also worked 6.5 years in MEP engineering, so little familiarity with the whole HVAC and electrical and all of that.
That's true. That reminds me that we were also in a methane zone. So I don't know if you dealt with methane before, but so we had to, most of the time methane, typical projects, you have slab on grade where you have raised floor, crawl space foundation. So either one of them needs ventilation. So we went through and installed perforated pipes underneath the concrete slab in the garage, and then routing those pipes all the way up to the roof. That was also something we were kind of dialing in. And there's a code that reads you have to have that ventilation pipe of the methane has to be I think it's 3 feet above the tallest portion. So again, you kind of have to know, as you know, all the utilities when you're thinking about, if you have a beautiful idea in mind and all this harmony and Feng Shui, but you really need to dial in all the utilities, including methane in this case, to make sure that everything dials in and you're thinking about, because the worst thing is, you have this idea in your head and the client has an idea in their head. It's going to be beautiful. And then all of a sudden there's this plumbing pipe or there's this methane pipe or there's, so it's also something else you gotta consider.
It's funny. I haven't worked on a project with methane in a number of years. And the last one I worked on was in California. In LA.
Oh, yeah. There you go.
I was sitting here thinking, I don't even know what the current rules are, because it's been quite a few years, because at the time they were just starting to really figure out what works in dealing with methane and what's the best way. And I want to say back then, it's been a long time, they were putting down like membranes, not perforated pipes.
Yeah, you the kind of process that you take test samples in the soil and determine the level of methane. Depending on the level, if it's a low level of methane, you can do an inactive system, which is just basically allowing the natural air to kind of flow through pipes. But if there's excessive amounts of methane, you have to have a mechanical system that'll actually evacuate the toxic air faster. So,
wow. So good question to ask early, or a good thing to check early, because like you said, it affects your design of whether commercial or residential. It's going to affect your design, because you're going to have those pipes coming out somewhere.
That's right.
Yep. Interesting.
It's a challenge today. Being an architect, so many things to think about.
I know.
So everybody makes it look easy, but.
Yeah, well, and you don't want to find it out later. You don't want to, and I wonder sometimes how you guys are able to make sure you check all those boxes ahead of time so you don't get surprised.
Yeah.
That happened on a project I worked. It was ground contamination. It wasn't methane, but it was a project I worked on, I don't know, probably about 7 or 8 years ago. And it was an empty site, and it had been empty for years, and they got this mixed use multifamily building all designed and ready to go, and they were starting to do the testing and everything. And it came back that apparently back in the day it was a dry cleaning business,
Right.
all the way back to like the 50s or whatever, and they had dumped all their chemicals in the ground. And they found out they had to take out like a couple feet, maybe even more than that. It might have been more like 10 feet of soil and
Yeah.
clean the soil, so to speak, by bringing in all new stuff before. And it ended up, the whole process, because they found it out later, not earlier, ended up adding a year to the project before it actually got built.
Oh yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So
That's
asking those questions early. Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's for sure. Yeah. Yeah. Especially on the commercial side. You kind of need to know the history of the site, do your phase 1 environmental analysis and that kind of thing as you're familiar with.
Yeah. They did it. They just did it a lot later than they should have.
No, I see. Yeah.
So every project has lessons learned. I learn something from every project I do. What was your biggest lesson learned from this project that is going to make you a better architect on the next project? And architect and builder. Let me qualify that.
There you go. Yeah, I think what I learned is the benefit of being creative, not just in design, but creative with budgets. So if you're trying to achieve X and your budget is Y, how can you get creative? And so, for example, actually, this is another thing I just remembered about this project. The level of finish on the plaster, there's very small variation in price, but when you're looking at, a 700 line spreadsheet, each line adds up, right? So on the north facade of the second floor, we went with a more textured plaster to save a couple of bucks here and there. So we were able to really maximize our client's budget. And so I feel like that's a lesson I learned, really getting creative, not just in the design. Of course, we like to be creative on the design side, but also creative on the budget analysis. I mentioned the commercial grade storefront system. So that was also a creative solution. And I think maybe the last thing would be, communication. So I think dialing in, making sure your clients are fully aware of what they're going to get, as far as what type of window system, the finishes, making sure they're aware, and also that they have the flexibility to choose these options. So I think they enjoyed that.
It sounds like in your model, the way your firm works and doing design build projects, that your design professionals are much more actively engaged and present during construction than you might see in it. It's not the typical just once a week site visit, look at everything and go back to the office. That's got to make a huge difference.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's really at least a couple times a day. Our architects are looking at, and I wouldn't say supervising, but they're definitely looking at the site at least a couple times a day. So because our guys are on the field and are constantly uploading project status images. And so if we see anything we need to discuss, it's instantaneous. So it is much better than just, okay, let's wait till next week when we go on site and, oh, whoops, what happened here? So it's pretty helpful.
Well, I imagine it's also a lot of real-time problem solving, not going through the typical channels. I'll send this over to this person and then to this person. And you can right there in the moment, figure it out. Mm-hmm. That's got to be beneficial as well. I love this model. I hope it takes on life all over the place.
Yeah. I mean, this model is kind of ancient. It's nothing new, but it's, I think it's gone up and down as far as how many people have used this model before. But, many centuries ago, you had to be, in order to be an architect, you had to spend X number of years on site. So we're kind of going back to that master builder model.
Yeah. And we've talked about that. I'm a spec writer. So, with spec writers in CSI, we've talked about the master builder model, and I'm not exactly sure why we ever strayed. But it just, I see the immense amount of benefits of having.
Oh, yeah.
I know that part of it has been due to risk and one firm taking on all the risk, where you could have it separated among parties, in a
True.
more traditional model. And I know that's got to be something that's thought about.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like talking about risk, it's almost less risky to have these two typically separate entities as one, because like we were just talking about, any issues, any concerns are instantaneously addressed. So that's a huge benefit.
Well, and you're in control of all of it.
Mm-hmm.
You're not building to some other architect's vision.
Right.
Everybody has kind of the same skin in the game in this model, which is another thing I love about it. What is your favorite thing about this home?
It's tough to say. I think the first, when you drive up into the neighborhood, it kind of sticks out. So it's a little bit different than the other homes in the area. But just the simplicity, I would say. The very simple juxtaposition of volumes is kind of interesting. But I also mentioned before about the front landscape berm, which I thought it was a fun, creative solution. So those are two elements.
I'm going to be going back in those pictures as soon as I hang up.
Yeah.
So what's next for Ally? What can I look forward to calling you and saying, okay, Marcos, when you coming on again to tell me about this one?
Yeah. So we've got a pretty big house we're working on in the Palisades. And what's also kind of interesting, sometimes like I mentioned before, we'll build for really good architects. We build a couple nice homes that other architects have designed. But this particular project, we're the architect and the builder, but the client is an architect. So that's always, we had a couple clients that were architects and hired us to be the architect. So that's also interesting. Oftentimes these architects are teachers or instructors in college. And so that's kind of an interesting project, full transformation of a pretty good size house. We also have another client, a French client, who wants a brand new house, but more on the high performance side. So they came to us. So I'm Passive House certified, which is a high performance building system out of Germany. So they're really interested in that aspect. They want a brand new house, a new garage. And this is for a project in Mar Vista. So yeah, we're excited about that. We get a lot of people really come to us for kind of two things, mostly this design aesthetic, whether it's Japanese or Scandinavian, and then also the performance aspect. So I know you're into the building science, so we love that as well.
I'm sitting here thinking about you working for architects. I have heard both really great stories about an architect or builder working for another architect, and I have heard horror stories. And I don't know if you can honestly answer this, but do you find that relationship challenging? Any client that
of course,
knows more about buildings than your average homeowner or building owner, I would think would be a little more challenging, because I know I would probably ask all kinds of questions you wouldn't get from a typical client if I had work.
I mean, sometimes it's good. Yeah, sometimes it's good where it's collaborative. So the architects, if they're an architect client, they push us and say, hey, what about this? Why we should maybe look at this. So it's interesting, completely different than obviously like someone who's out not in the trades, or in this case in the design world. But oftentimes they're either, some of the architect clients are commercial architects where they're not really familiar as much in the residential world, and others are more instructors. So interesting. But yeah, definitely a completely different breed, as you know.
Well, architects are just a completely different breed, period.
Exactly.
So I always close out my episode with two closing questions. The first of which is more of a broad industry question. So mine for you today, what would be your top 3 pieces of advice for a design professional considering jumping into the design bid world or design build world?
Right. Yeah. I would definitely encourage it. I think, like I mentioned a little bit before throughout this discussion, spending time on site is critical. You want to make sure you feel comfortable on site, building relationships with the trades. And then also, like you were talking earlier in this discussion about the separation between architect and trades. And so if that becomes an obstacle, I would definitely encourage connecting with general contractors. So obviously most architects, they're working with a general contractor as a third party. So I would just reach out and expand that network as best as you can. And then even before, if an architect is going to jump into design build, before they do that, they can actually partner with a GC, and especially ideally a GC who respects design, understands the details that you're trying to implement.
And has a good estimator.
Yeah, exactly. That's for sure.
Yeah, I imagine you are far more neck deep in the budgets at every juncture, as opposed to when you're in a typical architecture firm where you do these broad per square foot. There's thought put into them, but architects aren't estimators.
Right. Exactly.
Never had been.
The square foot discussion is a whole separate topic, but it's usually kind of the worst way to estimate a project.
Yeah.
Price per square foot. So
definitely. So final question, and all of my guests get this question. We all hope to live a life that leaves some kind of contribution to making the world a better place. Personal or professional, what do you hope your impact will be?
We do a lot of residential. We do some commercial. So every project we look at has an opportunity to make an impact on the people either who are living in the home or who are working in the building. So that's kind of a very simple answer, but we try to make an impact. And so the overall design, especially for homes, but sometimes in commercial projects, is we're trying to create calm environments. So an environment where the user, the homeowner, feels relaxed. So as soon as they either get home from work or if they're working in their house, every time they turn the corner, or everything kind of combines together into create a sense of relaxation. So if we can do that, I think we've achieved what we're kind of here for. That, I would say, one. The other side would be to inspire others. And so to create other architects, if we can help either people from our team or if we can inspire others to do the same, I think that would be a pretty decent impact we could leave.
That's a pretty big impact, because you're affecting another human being on a daily basis. Every minute, every hour. I know my environment very much influences how I feel, how I act, whether I'm a little type A, and so stress is a big deal for me. And I need that kind of calming environment, just so I don't go crazy. And, so something like that is, people don't think that about the little things. It's not a little thing, but it's the little things sometimes that make the biggest impact, or the passive things nobody ever thinks about that are absolutely influencing everything that's going on with you. So I think that's a pretty good goal.
Yeah, I remember you were mentioning, I think, earlier in the discussion about you were in, I think, Rome, was it? Or you were talking about your travels. Oh, Basilica. That reminds me of when I was in Rome. I don't know if you've been to the Pantheon.
Mm-hmm.
Just so the experience, if anyone's been in the Pantheon, you notice the oculus as you go into a large space. But that oculus, when the sun pierces through the oculus, and you have this sense of reverence and this experience. Obviously, you have the concrete and the vast height, but if you can capture a little bit of that energy and place it into any one of your projects and give that experience every day to somebody, I think that's pretty impactful. That's what we try to do.
Well, I think if you just stay in touch with, like going back to St. Peter's for a minute, that was, and I've said this before in the podcast, that was the first time a space made me cry. And it didn't make me cry because I was sad. It just, I was so emotionally, I'm like, what is going on here? I'm so emotionally impacted by, and I'm not religious.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I was raised, there's knowledge there, but I'm not a religious person. I don't go to church. So it wasn't an emotional impact based in the faith. It was an
Mm-hmm.
emotional impact due to the space. And I was
Yeah.
just so overwhelmed by the beauty and the intricacy and the art and the fine details and the pieta. I mean, and I'm like, I was like, this was quite a few years ago that I went to Italy. And to this day, I remember that feeling when I walked in there and just went, whoa, somebody just hit me with a 2x4. And this has never happened before.
Yeah.
Um,
That's an interesting interface with architecture where it makes you cry. That's definitely powerful.
Yeah. Well, but if you can take that and harness it, when you go in, like, you talking about going into the Pantheon and the Oculus and the way that made you feel, if you can walk away and not forget that,
Right.
based on what you do for a living, and keep that in your heart or in your, soul of how you approach your projects, I imagine you'll find different ways to create versions of those kinds of moments in the things you design. It's when you leave it behind. It's just
Exactly. Yeah.
that was a tourist thing and gone and forgotten that I don't. And that's a way those architects and artists from way back then are influencing people even now. You can do the same with your projects. So I think that's a pretty cool mission.
Yeah. I've actually heard of the philosophy of slowing time, so, I mean, when you stop and have to pause, and when the architecture of the space, the detail speaks to you, whether you're religious or not, whether it speaks to your spirit or your soul or however you want to say it, but yeah, where it really can just shift your time frame and shift your emotion. I think that's pretty powerful.
It is pretty powerful. Marcos, this is an amazing home. Totally impressed. Your firm is doing amazing things. I'm really excited. You better come back. I'm not even going to ask you. You have no choice. You better come back and tell me more about your projects.
Not a problem. Yes.
Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to join me today and tell me about this building. I can't wait to air this episode. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.